here's our contact information, and we'll make sure to put that in the chat before we sign off today as well, so you have it. But this is us. And we're just going to kind of walk through the process of and talk about our journey as becoming librarians, and try to kind of catch you up on recent developments in what's going on. But again, if you have questions along the way, please feel free.
Mary, it looks like Mary Lee, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I was just wondering, will you guys be posting the recording of this anywhere?
Yes. I can post that on the library website, on the same place that the event was organized, and I'll get you that link in just a moment.
No worries, thank you.
Or I'll post it at the end. How about that? That'll be a little easier.
That works.
Okie doke. Great. So the first thing is selecting and applying to graduate school. And yeah, I think there's lots of different ways to go about that. But from my perspective, what I always tell people when they ask me about this is one of the first things you should probably figure out is what kind of librarian you would like to be, because there are so many different ways of being a librarian, and some of them you may be familiar with, and some of them you may not. So it's a good idea not to just look at graduate school in terms of, is it near me? Where do I want to go to school geographically? But also look at the different programs and see what kind of things they offer, because there's a lot of variety. And the other part of that, I think, is also look at job ads is what I always tell people to do, because you want to know before you make a choice about what kind of librarian you want to be, you do want to know what jobs are out there, right? What kind of librarians are being hired. My classic example is always that, there's a lot more people hiring academic instruction librarians. So people who do at least part of the job for me and Rebecca is teaching in an academic setting. And those jobs are far more plentiful, for example, than people who bind rare books. Both are librarians, but one is a job that comes up a lot more than the other. That should be part of your awareness before you make a decision about how you're going to get a graduate education. So we'll share resources about how to do that, I think a little bit later, but just be aware that looking at job ads is a great way to actually decide where you're going to go to graduate school. Rebecca, what?
Yeah, so I think job ads are going to come up multiple times for us.
Yeah.
But I'll just kind of tell you like the story of how I came to librarianship that I think will hit some of the points about selecting and applying to graduate school and picking a type of librarianship. So I was a history major in undergrad, and I went to a small liberal arts school, so I felt like there were lots of different ways that I could go and places that I could take my education. So whenever I graduated from school, I really wanted to work in a museum. And so I got an internship doing that, and I was fortunate enough to actually work in a museum. It was a couple of years after I graduated because I kind of moved around. Anyway, so museums and libraries have a lot in common, but what I discovered while I was there was that I was doing a lot of public-facing work, which I enjoyed, but I really kind of missed that like research and teaching aspect that I knew was happening in libraries. So I worked at a library whenever I was a work study student. And so I knew some of the librarians. So I had kind of an idea of what they did in academic libraries. So then, after I decided, okay, librarianship is something I'm really interested in, I started doing all the things that y'all are probably doing, which is going to school websites and looking to see, get more information about the program. At the time, I was living in Texas. And so another thing that I'm sure will be a big factor for y'all is the cost of graduate school. So if you go into a professional graduate program, which is something that librarianship is considered, so that's like you're getting your master's degree for a specific type of job. There's not a lot of funding out there for professional master's degrees, right? So I knew that I was going to have to at least partially pay for this. So I was really interested in in-state tuition. So we're going to show you a resource, the American Library Association, that'll have information about all of the accredited schools, but accreditation is really important for getting a a job as a librarian that's in basically all of the job ads, that you have to get a degree from an ALA accredited school. And so being in Texas, the University of Texas was kind of it's the flagship university in Texas, but it was also kind of like the big place for going to graduate school. And the other thing I knew about myself is that I really wanted to do this in person for a few different reasons that had to do with like my life during that period. And Marika went to an online degree program, so she can talk a little bit about that. But I was looking for in-state tuition. I was looking for a program that did what I wanted to do. I knew that academic librarianship was something that they kind of specialized in. I knew that, and I knew that that would be something that would, that there would be opportunities for me in Austin because there are so many libraries there. So there would be some opportunities for experience. You know, the application, I did have to take the GREs, although I don't know that every school requires that. So I did have to budget for taking the GREs, but once you take them, if you're happy with your score, they last for quite a while. And, you know, I had to write the, you know, all of the other classic things. I reached out to my undergraduate professors for letters of recommendation. Even though it had been a few years, they still remembered me. And I also kind of reminded them who I was. So that's a big thing, you know, like include your resume. That's super helpful for getting those letters of recommendation. So that's kind of how I got to that decision. There's another library school in Texas that had rolling admissions. So in order to save money, I only applied to the University of Texas at first, but I had backup plans for other places I could apply if I didn't get in, because I knew that I didn't want to spend a bunch of money applying to a lot of different places. And I also knew that the odds were good that I would get in there. So that kind of is my decision and how I kind of got there.
Does anyone have any questions for Rebecca about that before we continue? Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Regina.
Yeah, so with the GRE test, like, what's the cut score for them?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part. What is the what?
It's like the GRE test, normally what's the score that they would like for you to get?
Oh, that's a great question. So it's been a long time since I've taken the GRE. I think that normally there's information on the college website about it, or like the university website about if they have a cutoff or not. And, you know, in some ways, I think that the GRE has kind of turned into, it's not like applying to like law schools, right? Where the LSAT, you want to get like the absolute highest score that you can. I think there's a little bit more flexibility with the GREs on the score that you can get. And if you have other supplemental things that can play a big part.
Thank you.
So, yeah, I can share a little bit about my experience because in some ways it's similar as Rebecca's, in some ways it's different. I had also worked in the library as a student in undergraduate for 2 years, and then I defected to the costume shop because I was a theater person. And so I did theater for a long time. And actually, while I was a theater freelancing person, I had a day job in another academic library because I had that earlier experience in college. So I used that to get me a day job that I thought was just a day job. I missed some things along the way, clearly, because now I work in an academic library, surprise. So I did have some experience to kind of inform me when I went career searching. Librarianship is my second career after working in theaters for years. And I had an idea that I might want to go to library school. And to pay the bills in the meantime, I got a day job in another academic library, which was actually the library here at Hollins. So at that point, I'm working in libraries and I want to study libraries. And that's not a bad position to be in if what you're going to do is an online program. Because, you know, you have to make a decision when you go to graduate school. Do you want to go in person and do you want to go online? And there's that contrast of if you go in person, you may be able to do it more quickly because you can go, you know, full time for a year or a year and a half, depending on how the program is structured, and be done. And you have that immersion of being on campus, of talking to your professors all the time, basically what you're used to here at Hollins, only the graduate school version. You may also be able to work in a library in the meantime, because many graduate school programs have assistantships where you work in the library of the university where you're also in the graduate program. So there's not a lot of funding, but those assistantships are often one way to help pay for at least part of it. So that's one model. Then there's the online model, which is attractive to people like me who are already working and need more flexibility and don't mind it. That may take them a little bit longer. It took me 3.5 years to go through my graduate program. And in that time, usually I took 2 classes in the spring, 2 classes in the fall, and 1 class in the summer. It would have been 3 years. I took 1 summer off for personal reasons. And so that tacked on an extra summer. But so that was my model. And at the time, which was 2005, classes were live already. You may think that online education, which is relatively new to a lot of professors at Hollins, is also new to everybody else, but it has been around. And especially the library schools picked up on online education very early. By 2005, when I was choosing an online programs had already been around for like 10 years. In graduate library education. And I chose a school deliberately who I knew had been doing it for quite a long time so that there wouldn't be, hiccups with the technology or the professors being unfamiliar with what they were doing. I went to the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, which is about 4 hours south of here. At the time, there was no graduate library school in Virginia. So that in-state tuition, which I also wanted, I actually did wind up getting, even though I went to school in Tennessee. There was a program called the Academic Common Market, which allowed you to apply for in-state tuition in another state if the program you wanted to study was not available in your state. And you could apply. It's kind of an exchange. And I was approved. So my in-state tuition in Tennessee was approved for Virginia, which is kind of unusual, but I think that program is still around. Here's the thing. There is now a graduate library school in Virginia. So I'm not sure you need the academic common market again. Old Dominion University in Norfolk started a graduate library program like 2 years ago. What Rebecca said earlier, though, is relevant. They are not yet accredited by the American Library Association, not because they've done anything wrong, but because these programs take a while. It takes a while to get accredited. And so they're currently provisionally accredited. They've applied for full accreditation, but that is still coming along. So I should share a little bit. Let me stop sharing slides for a sec. We'll go back to that in just a moment. Does anyone have any questions about what I was just talking about?
Yeah, I have one. I don't know if this is like an insensitive question to ask, but while we're just talking about like future, how much like does a full-time library position pay, like salary wise?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. So when I started my current position, I was offered a job at $39,000 a year as a librarian. Now, starting salaries are going to differ from school to school. There's a difference between public and private, and there's certainly a difference based on location and how busy a field is in a particular area. But that will give you a ballpark.
Yeah, I would say, I think it's really dependent on where you are located and the cost of living.
Mhm.
I will say that in general, I think that public universities tend to pay more than private universities do.
Yep.
And that information should be fairly easily available to you. If you go to like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they'll give you like an kind of like general range. The other thing that I think that is important is that if you decide to become an academic librarian and you work for a not-for-profit school, or if you're a public librarian where you're like working for the government, public service loan forgiveness right now is still a thing that's happening. So that was, I know there's been lots of conversation about, are we going to forgive other people's student loans? Are we going to forgive a certain amount? But that was a big factor for me too, was that I knew that if I got a job at a not-for-profit university, I could join this program and then I could get, some of my student loans, which I had some from undergrad too, that I could get some of those forgiven. And that was that kind of helps me think about like the investment that I was going to have and the salary that I might be able to expect.
I wanted to describe a little bit more before I forget about the online part of the online education. So there's also, and this is different for different schools. So you should also look at this and think about how you like to learn, because some online programs are what's called asynchronous, which means that you get assignments, you work on those assignments on your own, you send your work to the professor and you get feedback, but you're not necessarily meeting in person all at the same time with your class. Synchronous programs meet in person simultaneously, except it's online. And that was my program at the University of Tennessee. We were using webinar software and there were slides. I could hear my professor. We had chat on the side. Just it's very similar to Zoom, except at the time broadband was still an issue. Well, it's still an issue depending on where you live. So we didn't use video because that would just take up too much bandwidth. But we had live classes, and sometimes our project was do a presentation on this. So in addition to learning online, we were also actually learning how to teach online, which I found really useful since. Zoom was not as much a shock to me as it was to other people because of that graduate program that I went through. So online education is also different depending on the place you go to, and you should think about what will make most sense to you. If you have a very busy job, then asynchronous may be better for you because you can do your homework and read your classes, read your homework whenever you have time to do that. If you learn better when you're in a group and you're there and you're discussing the material, then you need to look for asynchronous education. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we can talk a little bit about ALA and graduate school websites. Is that a good time, Rebecca?
Yeah, sure. Mary Lee had another question, I think.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, you guys can hear me? Give me a thumbs up, yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just wondering, is there any way to look for like reviews of grad schools based on their online programs? Like, is there a website that has that? Because I don't know where to look for that information.
So I think that I don't know if there's something that so there are ranking programs, right, for graduate schools. That's the same thing for library schools too. I would say, however, one of the reasons I wanted to go to the University of Texas is because it was pretty highly ranked. No one has ever asked me about that since then. I think that it's really what you do with it and making sure that that the classes that you're taking are useful for you and your goals. I mean, certainly you don't want to go to a school where, it's dysfunctional and it's like losing accreditation, but I think that really a lot of your graduate work in library school is really what you make of it and the goals that you set for yourself.
That's true. I'm not aware of a website where there's rankings. I do have one piece of advice, and I think most graduate schools will do this for you, but you probably have to ask. I would suggest that when you're talking to them about applying and when you're getting to know the people who are kind of the administrators for the program who send you information about the program in the first place and can put you in touch with faculty and things like that, when you're talking to those people, say, can I talk to some alumni? Ask for contact information for people who have graduated from the program and then set up a time to chat and ask them some questions like, what were your classes like? Did you ever have a professor who didn't respond at all? I mean, if you have specific concerns about the type of education that you're going into, and you've been in school for a while now, so you probably have some thoughts about how things can go off the rails. Ask about that. Ask if that happened to them.
That's really helpful.
Ask what they really liked.
Yeah. I didn't know you could ask for alumni connections. I knew like you could for interviews and stuff, but that's very helpful because it's not something I thought about.
Well, I've been asked before to talk to incoming students, and sometimes it's in the context of, we're doing a day and can you come to this day and can you just chat to people as they show up? But I've also just been asked because there's someone in town who wanted to talk to a graduate from UTK and I was here and could I go have lunch with them? So you can totally ask for that. And especially now we're all used to meeting on Zoom. That's relatively easy to set up, I would think. Other questions?
I have another. How long does it take for, like, say, like an academic library to get back to you about, like, getting an interview for a job?
So we have a whole section that's about like talking about like searching for jobs. So I think we're going to hit that.
Okay.
Okay. Let's look at websites for grad school stuff real quick. So meet the American Library Association, ALA. Don't try to read this entire website. You won't finish before you retire. But the good news is there's this section called Education and Careers, which is what we're talking about now. So if I open that up, the first link is ALA accredited programs, and they have a nice little searchable database. Oh, there's actually more here. There's librarians. We always give you more information. Where's the thing? Okay, the first one is the program directory. That's what I was looking at in a searchable database format. You may have to click a few times before you get to this part. Anyway, this is what I was looking for. So you can go to a specific institution if you know what you're looking for, but you can also say, okay, I'm looking for a particular location or all states and provinces. And then look what happens as you go down, right? I can choose what kind of distance education I want to be available. I can see whether they have a particular area of concentration, such as academic librarianship, children's services, digital libraries, etc. Because some schools will have concentrations in several of these, but not everyone. Like, right, not everyone has a music librarianship program, but somebody will. So if that's important to you, check that box and see what comes up. You can choose which level you're looking at, and then you click search and you get a list. So this kind of lets you look geographically or by subject specialty or both, and pull up a list. Or you can start Googling around for programs, and what's the most common term for this type of education is LIS, and I would use that as a search term, Library and Information Science. That's what we call the field these days. So when I was looking for Old Dominion University's program in Virginia, I Googled ODU LIS, and boom, here we are in ODU's Master of Library and Information Studies program. And then the websites are all kind of laid out in the same way. They tell you a little bit about their program. Here's one of those concentrations highlighted right here. They have a concentration in school librarianship, for which you also need to be licensed as a teacher. And then you can go through this program and become a school librarian or media specialist in K through 12. So that's one thing that ODU lets you specialize in. I had to drill down a little bit further into, I think it was under student resources. They talk about their student organizations. And here's the really useful stuff. They have concentrations in this program. So there they show you what track you would take if you're interested in academic libraries or youth services or public libraries. I know I'm doing this rather quickly, but I don't want to, I'm just kind of sampling this website right now. The other thing that was nice is all of their courses are online. And all of the grad program websites will be similar to this in that they put this all up here for you. So again, before you make a decision about where you want to go to school, you want to read through this and make sure that they actually have what you want to learn, right? If I get out of ODU, here is UNC Greensboro, which our colleague Coleman is attending right now. Actually, he's, again, working here full-time, but going to graduate school in North Carolina. And this is their MLS program. Little different. ODU was 30 semester hours. North Carolina looks like 36. So you also want to look at those differences when you're considering a graduate school. How many credits do you need and how long is that going to take you? So let me get back to our slides. Sorry, too many buttons. Making the most of your program. What other tips do we have about that, Rebecca?
Yeah, so I would say, and I feel pretty strongly about this, you either need to go to a program where you can get experience in libraries that are there, or if you're taking it online, you need to have a way to get experience. Whether it's you're already volunteering for a public library, or you already have a job in a library, or you know someone who's going to be able to help you. You cannot get a job in librarianship with just your master's degree. You have to have experience. And so the reason I'm mentioning it in here is in this section about, once you're in graduate school, that's a big reason why I chose the University of Texas, because they have a huge library system for the University of Texas. There's also the Austin Public Libraries. And so once I was in graduate school, I immediately started looking at, once I had my email address and I'm starting to get all the information about starting the program, I immediately started looking for graduate research assistant positions or teaching assistant positions. So I was a graduate research assistant for the main library on campus at the University of Texas. So this meant that I was working in at the Ask a Librarian desk. So this is their reference desk where people come in and ask questions. So I got some really, really important training on how do you answer reference questions? What is the reference interview? So this is like when someone tells you that they have a question for a class, there's a process or question, a research question. There's a process that you go through to help get more information, to help talk about what they already know. And I got to experience that, firsthand and learn how to do it along with the classes that I was taking. And that was incredibly important. From a financial aspect, the job was pretty well paying. I'm trying to remember now how much I made. I think it was I want to say $13 an hour or something, which is pretty good, 10 years ago, whenever, especially in graduate school. But also very importantly, I got free health insurance by having this job because I joined the University of Texas employee system. So those were things that were, making sure I could get experience and then making sure that I could get paid while I was there, because I knew I wanted to have a job, to pay rent and stuff like that. That was really important to me. And that really enriched my experience so much because I was, learning from the librarian that was my boss. I was getting to learn firsthand. I got to meet a ton of different librarians that work there and see all the different ways that they help people in the work that they do. And that made a huge difference in my educational experience too. So I think that is critically important. I would not advise anyone who is thinking about going to graduate school if they, live somewhere where there was, not a public library system or not a place that they could get experience. I would not advise them to go to graduate school because that is so important to get a good job. You need to find a way to do that. And for some, I will say for some programs that is might be built into the program, whether it's a practicum or a volunteer experience. So there are lots of different ways to do that. That's just how I did it. So that was really great. I also had, I worked for another library too, as I'm trying to remember what the job title was. It was kind of similar to what I was doing at the University of Texas, but it was at a smaller private university. It's actually where I got my undergraduate degree. And so that was really useful too, because I got to see what it was like to work in a huge academic library and what it was like to work in a small liberal arts private university. You can see where I ended up, so you can probably tell my preference. And I really liked working in that smaller university environment, but that was really vital to me. So I think that's probably my biggest takeaway from making sure that your experience is useful is making sure there's ways that you can apply it and making sure that there are connections that you can make while you're in graduate school. And your professors are going to be an obvious connection, right? They can talk about their experience and whatever kind of librarianship or work that they're doing, but it's really important to go beyond the classroom as well.
I want to add to that a little bit. I was thinking about this when you were talking about getting recommendations for graduate school, actually. And you can think about this for recommendations for getting into graduate school, for jobs while you're into graduate school, and for job applications after you get out of graduate school. There are fields that have transferable skills that are strongly related to librarianship. And always, if you have a job in these fields, make sure that you note that when you go apply for school or for a job. Those fields are teaching or tutoring, because librarianship is so much about teaching people to use information. Another aspect is customer service. Any job with customer service makes you more qualified to work in a library because we're an outward-facing profession that deals with people coming in the door needing your help all day long. So teaching, customer service, anything that's related to tutoring or training, anything that is teamwork or group work oriented because librarians have to work as a team in order to make a place like ours work. So remember those team projects that you do in school and talk about those in your application. It's important to be able to collaborate. What other skills, Rebecca?
Yeah, so this is a time, so I did look at job ads before I went to graduate school to make sure I kind of knew what was going on. But while I was in graduate school was really the time that I was like making copies of them, keeping them in my email to see what other skills there were. So like outreach is something that like, which Marika does. This is like a very common thing for particularly in academic libraries to have this skill of like developing events and programs and things like that. But I was making sure that I was also building those like other extra skills that might be there. And I was taking note of like, whenever I had like a strong experience for something like that, right? So if you have a group project that you just like totally rock whenever you're in graduate school and it goes really well and it's super practical, like bookmark that or just like write down a couple thoughts about that, because that's going to be something that's definitely applicable whenever you're applying jobs and that you can draw on. You know, that was a really big part of writing my cover letter for whenever I was applying for jobs and whenever I got my job at Hollins.
And honestly, if you have a special skill or interest, Google that and the word librarian, and you would be surprised how many librarians are out there doing different things. We had someone, the last time we did this panel, someone said, well, you know, I'm math, I'm really into data. Can I do anything with that as a librarian? And I said, oh my God, I just read an article about the hot new field of data librarianship, because there are now a bunch of librarians in academic settings whose job it is to corral and organize and work with all the data that these massive research programs are producing. So that's now a librarian job. Who knew? It would be perfect for this person. And they had no idea, and I had just learned about it. So you would be surprised how broad this field really is. And you'll see that also on the websites of these graduate programs. They will talk about what their graduates are doing. And these people aren't necessarily working in libraries. Many of them are, but some of them are working in corporations, hospitals. They are in competitive intelligence. They are in knowledge management. They are all in all these kinds of fields where the word librarian doesn't even show up until way, way down in the job description. So there's a broad world out there of, again, this is why it's called library and information science, because the landscape of information is huge.
Right. I have friends from graduate school who like one is like now like building programs for a company. And so it's like actually a library database company. But he like writes code all the time. And that's, you know, he got into that whenever he was in graduate school. There was someone else from our program that went to work for a government intelligence organization right after graduate school, because they recruit out of that as well. I know someone else who works for a hospital system now. She was working on developing their like data sharing system for, I think it's the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia.
Yeah. Let's see, what else did we have? Oh, job hunting. So let's just for a moment, and I think it was Mary Lee who pointed this out in the chat. Let's go back to the ALA website for a second, because the other thing we wanted to show you there is the job list. So where is my, oh, right, okay. So I have to undo this for a sec. There we go. So back to the American Library Association, and we said education and careers, employment. There we go, ALA job list. This is a job listing service for library people. And like most services these days, it lets you search keyword, it lets you do a location, it lets you set up an alert once you've done a search to get it emailed to you every once in a while. And as we scroll down, you can see lots of jobs and lots of ways to filter it here on the side. Notice again here, you can choose primary job function. If you're looking for children's librarian jobs, go ahead and apply that filter. So you're not looking at 186 jobs, but only the ones that are children oriented. So these are going to be, again, this is the American Library Association, all libraries. So this could be public libraries, this could be academic libraries, this could be everybody. Now, this is the American Library Association. Librarians love professional organizations. Every state has one of these too, like Virginia Library Association, VLA, has a job list website just for library jobs in Virginia. Your state, wherever you are at home, will also have. They will have their state library association website and a job list on that. These services are always free to applicants. If anyone asks you to pay to see listings for library jobs, just say no, because there are free services. So there is the associations, ALA, VLA, etc. And then there is, I need a library job. Yep. Someone created, I need a library job.com, which also has job ads. And career resources. And oh, cool, they have interviews with people talking about what kind of job they do. So that's kind of great. And here, yeah, okay, here are the job lists. So this is another listing service to look at. And so this is useful before you think about going to school, just to see what's being hired. And then, of course, when you get out of school to get yourself a job as well. And you can see over here on the left just how incredibly diverse this field is. We have people, certified records manager, content associate, data curator. Somewhere in there, they're librarians too, but there's a lot of other stuff as well. Questions about this? I feel like I'm talking too much.
Yeah, so I'll say going back to just general job searching, because there was a question about timeline, like how long does it take? So I can't speak to other types of libraries. However, in academic librarianship, you're looking at probably a 6-month timeline from the time that you apply to when you might actually begin the job. In academia, there's a period where people are applying, then you probably have multiple interviews, and then you have some type of on-campus interview where you come and you meet with students, you meet with your hiring committee, you probably do a presentation. Whenever you're in library school, it's particularly if you're at an on-campus, like if you're on campus or near a library school, you should ask the librarians that work there if they have if they're hiring for people, if you can come and join, like just to see the presentation. Those are normally open to like the entire staff. So I got to see a couple of librarian presentations while I was in graduate school to give me an idea of like, okay, like this is what a job talk looks like, or these are the kind of prompts that they have that people might ask you for as well. So seeing that is really useful. For public libraries, I don't know that it's quite the same. For that, I would, there might be a presentation, but I don't know that the timeline is quite the same. And I don't know if you, like if you would fly to the job interview if it's not where you're located or things like that.
I don't have data on this, but anecdotally, I think corporations, public libraries, pretty much everyone is faster than academic libraries. So whatever timeline you're imagining, just think the slower version is always going to be on the academic side, unfortunately.
Right. The other thing I'll say is that particularly academic librarianship is a very national job market. I certainly know people who were like really, for whatever reason needed to stay in one location and they stayed there. And, sometimes it took them longer to find a job. I think most of them have them now. But like I moved across the country to come here. I moved from Texas to Virginia. So I had to do a lot of thinking about what is the kind of place that I want to live? What is the kind of salary that I need to live there? All of those pieces as well. And I would say for, 75% of people who are applying for academic library jobs, like they're considering moving to go there as well. We get, whenever we have a librarian position that we're hiring, we get ads from all kinds of, or applications from all kinds of places. So that's something to consider as you're, thinking about the career that you might have after that. And I think to a certain extent, public libraries, there is some like movement for jobs as well.
One of the things that's become way more common than it was in my time, which is cool, is that people are putting their professional portfolios online. So look for people's library portfolios. Look for people who are young and either in or about to graduate from grad school or are already job hunting. Some of their materials are online, and you can take a look and see how they are setting themselves up. How are they marketing themselves? What classes did they take in school? You can look for examples of this kind of thing. That's especially common in academia.
Oh, the other thing I would encourage you to use is whatever kind of career center there is for your graduate program. Sometimes it's based like in that specific college. Sometimes it's for like the entire university, but that was super helpful for me whenever I was working on my cover letter and practicing interviewing. Like the school that I went to had a really robust career services program just for librarians for that master's program. And so that was incredibly helpful and getting feedback on that, because your cover letter and your resume, right, are the first line of things that people are going to see. And I will generally say, you know, Marika and I have been on hiring committees for librarians now since we've been here for a while. My general philosophy with resumes and cover letters, because we do all kinds of crazy stuff, is that the question I would ask myself is, does this make it easier for someone to read? And if the answer is no, you may want to reconsider doing that, whether it's like a font, or if you're like totally changing the layout of your resume. You want to make sure that it's easy for people to read, because you know, there might be a lot of job applicants for that, and so you want to make sure the information is easily accessible.
In addition to that, yeah, I mean, imagine that there may be a pile of 100, right? And so you don't want to be the one who makes it difficult, because if you're the one who makes it difficult and I have 99 others, then it's possible that I may just recycle the one who makes it difficult. And that's just a time management thing. Hiring committees are people who have a full-time job and then they're on a search. So they're busy, and you want to make their lives easy. Also, generally, this may be changing because I'm older, but the hiring committees that I've been on are relatively conservative in terms of, is what they're looking at kind of standardized and logical and presented in a way that isn't goofy. And goofy is not a technical term, but you know what I mean. Creativity is nice, but on the other hand, if your resume looks wildly different from everybody else, that may not always go over well. So look for examples online, and look for what is kind of logically structured, and as Rebecca says, easy to read, easily accessible, and makes it easy for me to understand what is important about how you're selling yourself. The other thing about applying for jobs, please, please, please learn a little bit about the organization you're applying to. I've gotten letters that tell me how badly this person wants to be a librarian at Virginia Tech. I mean, that's how much they were not paying attention. And in a profession where attention to detail is important, that gets recycled because you sent it to Hollins. So, but if you tell me a little bit about what you understand about Hollins and what is important on our campus and to our programs, then my ears perk up, because I go, oh, this person actually cares about what we're doing here and is interested in that. It doesn't have to be huge amounts of research in order for you to go to a school's website and learn a little bit about that school and what their priorities are, or read the latest library newsletter and see what they're talking about when they talk about their organization. So when you apply for a job, make it specific. Tell them that you've done your homework, especially for applying as a librarian. That's important.
Yeah, I think in my cover letter for Hollins, I talked about the mission of Hollins in there. And then whenever I was doing my on-campus interview, or I think it was my on-campus interview, right, I had the names of everyone who's on my interview panel. I had a specific question for each person based on their job and what they did. You know,
that's good.
Okay. Yeah, I was like, you know, Luke, tell me about this. Lila, tell me about this. Kathy, tell me about this. As you know, a demonstration that I was like genuinely interested in Hollins and what they were doing here.
Yep, it's more work, but it's going to get you closer to the top of that pile for sure. So it's work that pays off. If it's in your top 5, then treat it like that.
I know we're kind of running low on time. There is one other piece that we wanted to mention, along with Q&A. It's just kind of like what we do and what might be unexpected that we do, right? Because I recognize some people from classes that I've had, so you know that part of my job, but you may not know the other aspects. So I thought we could share a little bit about like what our day-to-day looks like. Do you want me to go first, Marika, or do you want to?
Yes, go ahead and go first. Thanks.
Yeah, so the reason I'm looking to the side, I have another screen over here. I was looking at my calendar for this week to kind of give you an idea of some of the stuff that I've been doing. So this week, I did a conference presentation. So if you're an academic librarian and a public librarian, participation in professional organizations is very encouraged. So I did a conference presentation this week that was online. It was pretty cool because it was a webinar, and so I couldn't see all of the audience's faces, so it really takes some of that pressure off. So I did that, and I went to a couple of sessions for that conference. Another thing that I did is I worked on a meeting agenda for a group that I'm working with. It's a management mentoring group. So I mentioned that I'm the assistant university librarian. I manage kind of the operations of the library. So that includes the checkout desk, it includes interlibrary loan, and it includes the copy cataloging and ordering books. So something that I've been really working on since I became a manager is just like, how do I become a good manager? And so I've joined a group of other librarians who are managers who are talking about that. And so I worked on the meeting agenda for our next group meeting. We had a staff meeting this week where we talked about what the library is going to look like in the summer, because we're making those decisions together as the entire library. So I'm thinking about, other aspects beyond just the operations of the building. I prepared for a class. I had a research consultation with a student this week. And then I also had a meeting with Marika and the other teaching librarians where we're talking about instruction and, teaching and learning in libraries. And we have a specific agenda that we're looking at related to the research skills that are taught at Hollins.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, one of my jobs at the library is to kind of coordinate the teaching that we do here in the library. So before we had that meeting with the librarians, I read a bunch of articles to choose something that we could all read and then discuss at that meeting. So I wound up doing a bunch of research and reading in the weeks leading up to that. In January, related to that responsibility, I was writing a data report because we did an assessment project in the fall of our instruction in first year seminars. And I was looking at a bunch of data and writing that up to go into the massive report that's related to Hollins accreditation as a school. So you'd be surprised. People tend to think of librarians in a very traditional way of our sitting in our office with a book. It's rare that I get to sit and read a book, to be honest. I spend most of the day on my computer. So be aware that things like data analysis and meetings are a large chunk of our day. But then there's also other fun stuff. I had an appointment with a student this week where we talked about her paper and the things that she needed. I taught 2 classes. I went and interviewed some people for a piece that I want to write for our upcoming newsletter. Because another part of my job is communicating for the library in various ways and planning programs. I'm also constantly emailing with students because I'm trying to collaborate with a couple of different student groups to do programming. What else do I do? Well, I'm supposed to be buying books, except I'm doing all this other stuff. So I also have a massive list of books that I need to look at and make a decision on. And I am late on that. So there's the book part. But to tell you the truth, the to-do list before I get to the books is long. One of the things you should do probably is you have an idea about what librarians do. Go find 1 or 2 of your favorite librarians and ask them what their day is like. Ask them to tell you what we just told you. Take them to lunch or Zoom or whatever we need to do these days. But find out what their work is like. We should leave the rest of the time probably for questions, I'm thinking, because, wow, this has gone really fast. Do people have other questions for us, things we haven't talked about?
Yeah, Emma.
We've talked a lot about the ALA, and I do know that they have like an annual conference. So I guess my question is, would you suggest that we attend these sort of library conferences, and how early in our education or career should we start making that effort?
Honestly, anytime, if you can afford it, and look for student rates, look for scholarships. It's often a great idea to join. Librarians use email listservs an awful lot. Join one or two listservs in an area that you're interested in. There's all kinds of sub-organizations. Like I'm on the listserv for the music librarians. I'm on the listserv for the art librarians. And those listservs will send out notices that say, hey, our conference is coming up, and by the way, there's student scholarship. Thank you. Rebecca's sharing something in the chat. They're useful for all kinds of reasons. They're useful for meeting people and networking. They're useful for meeting people and asking them what their job is like, which I just was talking about. They're useful for going to presentations and finding out what is important in the field right now. And then you can apply that to your education or to your job. So I would say go anytime that you can, while understanding that there's dozens of library conferences and you certainly can't go to them all. But they're kind of great.
Yeah, I would say that, ALA is a great one and it covers kind of like a huge spectrum of things. I think that it's probably one of the more public librarian focused conferences that you can do. The Association of Colleges and Research Libraries has a conference every 2 years that's really focused on academic libraries. So if you're interested in that track, that's a good one. The DLF, the Digital Libraries Federation, is not a conference I've been to, but that one is super popular if you're interested in like digital librarianship or those kind of aspects are the big ones that I think about. But we also have the Virginia Library Association conference that Marika and I have gone to many times. And the nice thing about a smaller conference is that you get maybe a little bit more chance to interact with people. And the other thing I'll say about conferences, particularly if you go to one of the really big ones, is that there is normally some kind of like resume review or, talking about looking for jobs, or other people who are looking for jobs or looking to hire people. That normally happens at those conferences too. And you might be able to, someone from like your library school might sponsor someone to go there. There's almost always a discounted rate if you're a student as well.
The other thing I should add to that is, aside from conferences as a learning opportunity, these associations often have mentoring networks. Go to the different websites and look for opportunities for getting yourself a mentor. And I think that can happen while you're still in library school, even, or if you're working as a paraprofessional in a library and hoping to become a librarian at some point. Those mentoring networks are great.
Does that answer your question, Emma?
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Let's see. Becca was asking, do you need an MLS to work in a public library? So that's a good question. For some positions, you might, like management positions may at times require it, but it varies. And public libraries is where there's the most level of flexibility in that. So it's really going to depend on the library. Academic libraries, mostly people who are at the librarian level, which means they're considered the professionals. They're often the ones who have supervisory responsibilities, like Rebecca. There, it's pretty ubiquitous that you need a graduate degree for academic, but public really is different. It varies. What was the second part of that question? What about another graduate degree like an MFA? Those can be helpful actually in academia, because your second MFA can get you a job that allows you to specialize in a certain field. For example, I was an easy candidate for Hollins for the arts librarian job because I also had an MFA in theater. So I had the graduate degree in information science, the MFA in theater, boom, that slotted me very nicely into that position. It made it easy for Hollins to hire me. But I don't think it's often accepted as a substitute for the initial information science degree.
I think it varies if you have like extensive experience and another master's degree. But it's more rare than having like the MLS. I think normally it says like an MLS or like another graduate degree along with equivalent experience.
Yeah, good point. Other questions?
Mary Lee, did you